of all places, Silicon Valley, which fancies itself as being the most optimistic place in the world. These are makers of history, makers of the future. So what are they so afraid of?
In his new book, Haves and Have Yachts, Evan Osnos explores growing wealth disparity and the subtle self-delusion embraced by the ultra-rich. And I'm pleased to say Evan joins me now. Evan, welcome to Times Radio.
Thanks, Hugo. Great to be with you.
Good to have you. Look, over the last 8 years, you've been reporting on the private domains, obsessions, intimate dealings, and anxious rivalries of the ultra-rich. Is it all like sort of real-world episodes of Succession and The White Lotus?
Hmm. There's just a reason I suppose that those shows have registered with the public as deeply as they have, because they pick up on something, which is this strange, ambivalent relationship we have to these giant fortunes. On the one hand, let's face it, people aspire to join some of it, and there is also a lot of disillusionment and frustration, and getting the balance of those two into one portrait is part of what gives this, I think, some energy. That's the goal in the writing.
Tell us, who exactly are America's current oligarchs? Because we think of them, I suppose, as being largely tech-based. How true is that?
Well, it's largely true. There was an astonishing pageant, you'll recall, on January 20th, right there on the stage at Donald Trump's inauguration, where you got to see, in effect, the call it what it is, that in the embrace of plutocracy and politics without any shame or pretense. And what you saw on that stage were the three richest men in the world: Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos, but also the heads of all the major tech companies. And then also in that room, and I think it's important to mention, is that there were people who were less known, but are in some sense the offspring of the crucial decision made by the Supreme Court to take off any of the constraints on political spending in the Citizens United decision. That's what created the era we live in now in political terms in America.
What kind of people are we talking about? Describe some of them to us.
Well, you have everything from financiers who are in the sort of traditional mode on Wall Street, through hedge fund managers who may not have ever run a large company, but have command over tremendous levels of resources. They can, with one decision, have the effect of shutting down coal mines in West Virginia. And I mention that because it's not an abstraction. It's actually a real example that when I was reporting in West Virginia, in fact, looking at what the impact of this kind of financialization of the United States economy meant, I remember a coal miner saying to me at one point, he had heard that the CEO of the company that had bought the mine was paid 400 times the frontline coal miner. And he said, do you know any person who is truly worth 300 or 400 times the worth of another man? And I thought there was something quite powerful in that.
Something very powerful in that. Look, reporting about these people from the from the enclaves of these people, it must be a very complicated process, a rather professionally dangerous process, perhaps. Because these people have vast resources they can marshal against you if they don't like what you're saying. How do you go about it?
It is a bit sensitive in the reporting, in the sense that occasionally, more than occasionally perhaps, there'd be a lawyer who might try to run me off the story and suggest that this wouldn't be a productive or safe use of my time and energies. I think it's almost unseemly as a reporter to complain about the experience of working in a place as luxurious as Monaco or Palm Beach. But the reality is that the stakes are rather high on those stories, and I often found that it was a reminder of why I was doing the piece at all, which is that the power wielded by a very small stratum of society can have the effect of deflecting attention when in fact they really are shaping our lives every day in ways that are easy to overlook unless you detail it in print.
Yeah, well, look, brass tacks here. The book is called Haves and Have Yachts. Who's got the biggest yacht?
Right now, the biggest one that has real attention belongs to none other than Jeff Bezos. He built, and I should add, Hugo, that the current trend is not just to have one yacht, of course, but to have one and a support yacht following it. And, he spent upwards of beyond $500 million. And, it's worth reminding ourselves, we're talking about pleasure vessels that are the length of a football field. They are the most expensive objects that our species has ever owned in history, more expensive than the most valuable works of art, like Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi or the most expensive estates. And I chose to focus on them as a symbol of our time because I think these super yachts are, in their own strange way, artifacts. And I often thought of what would future historians or archaeologists make of these objects if they came upon them, sifted them out of the soil, and said, "What did the societies that created these? What were they like? What was behind it all?"
Like they were the pyramids or something. So look, what do they? Is there any commonality there? What do the ultra rich want? Do they want bigger and better yachts? Are they in competition with each other? How motivated are they by acquisition, and how motivated are they by power? And do they distinguish between those two things?
It's a really interesting point. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, it becomes almost a self generating internal logic of competition that people who find themselves on that process can lose sight of even why it is that they're scraping so hard to get into a bigger yacht. I am reminded of a just a throwaway line that always stays with me in the diaries of John Paul Getty, who was, after all, at one point the richest man in the world in the 1950s. One of the essays in this book is about his heirs and how they have structured their inheritance to avoid taxes. And I think what really struck me was that he once wrote in his own diaries, after he was already rich beyond any possible limit of what he could spend, he said, "I don't even know why I do it anymore." He said, "Out of habit, perhaps." And I think there is something there. I think for others, and I don't want to generalize, there are some people here who are massively philanthropic. And I think that's important to recognize because sometimes we end up focusing so much on the bad actors, people like Elon Musk, who have done a lot of damage lately. And it's not me talking. That's Bill Gates, after all, who has recently reminded us that, to use Gates's words, the picture of the world's wealthiest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one. And I think there are also people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates who have devoted most of their fortunes to philanthropy. And I think it's worth saying that we have choices we can make right now in our time, and we can choose to follow the Musk path or perhaps more of the Buffett path.
What how are they responding and how are they operating in the Trump era? I appreciate the Trump era is currently, well, the second Trump era anyway, is quite short, but presumably they've nonetheless been on quite a journey because they all welcomed it in, and one would think that they must have, although everything's relative, in many cases lost a huge amount of money over the last couple of months.
It has been variable based on the nature of their investments and their businesses. Some lost a great amount and then also gained it back because some of the market rebound has rebounded to their benefit. I also think that there has been um, behind the scenes, Hugo. One of the most interesting things is hearing people think through and talk about why they went on that stage, on that inauguration stage, because for some of them, no question, they are ideological uh, fellow travelers with Donald Trump. Elon Musk has lashed himself to this president in every conceivable way, politically and philosophically. But there were others in there who felt a kind of strange sense of vulnerability, as if they couldn't afford not to be there because they have found themselves, by virtue of the fact that they have assembled fortunes so large, they are also strangely vulnerable to retribution, to attack. If he wanted to, he could treat them like oligarchs in other countries. A scholar said to me recently, I sometimes want to remind these tech tycoons that the story of being an oligarch doesn't always end so quietly. I mean, there are places in the world where once the leader has found that his economy is not going as swimmingly as he likes, he begins to look at those pots of gold and say, well, maybe I should do what I can to take control of them. So it's a strange kind of vertigo when you get to be that wealthy.
Well, whether you meant to or not, directly or not, you just, I think, described Mark Zuckerberg rather well. I know you interviewed him. Does he see himself as being a kind of an oligarch in the traditional mold? Does he understand that that's his role?
He is a person who has almost been swamped by his own circumstances, meaning that, remember, this is a person who, over the course of 2 decades, went from being a college student to being the richest entrepreneur of his generation, somebody who has more adherents on his social media platform than there are adherence to Christianity. It is a level of responsibility and power that is, in its way, I think, if I'll be frank about it, it's a level that he was not prepared for, and that he doesn't have a particularly coherent response to. He is uh, he is making it up as he goes along, and I think that there's a risk in that, which is that he's powered by this almost volcanic sense of ambition to make a big mark on history. But as a result, he doesn't know really how he should fit into the world politically. He doesn't have a worked out idea of what it means to be a responsible steward of public interest. And I sometimes hope that people like Mark Zuckerberg will take a lesson from the history of somebody like John D. Rockefeller, who was at one point, of course, a robber baron, was quite disliked by the public, and realized I have to turn my winnings, as it were, into the public interest. And he founded the University of Chicago, created a big philanthropic legacy. Somebody like Andrew Carnegie, who created libraries in small towns all over the United States. And, they were motivated partly by faith, by sort of an old world sense of civic duty. It's a bit in short supply among some of these current generation of tycoons. And I hope they'll take a page from the generations that came before them.
You say that to understand how power works in Washington, we have to pay attention to where the powerful congregate. Where do they congregate? Where can I go and watch them as if they were animals in a zoo?
Well, you'll have to save up, because the current place to do it is a new private club in Washington, founded, in fact, by the president's son, Don Jr., and it's called Executive Branch, which is, frankly, quite a um, quite a naked description of what it is, which is designed to provide access to the executive branch. But it'll cost you $500,000 to as an initiation fee. It's quite a telling detail, because historically in Washington there were clubs, always have been, but you'd get in by, I don't know, winning a Nobel Prize for literature, or perhaps making peace. And here it is now, there is this entity which is explicitly created, as one of the organizers put it, to be a place where it's a sanctuary for those that it keeps us away from, as he put it, fake news reporters and people we don't know and we don't trust. That's a strange turn in American political history.
I'll have to see if I can expense it, I suppose. How much are these people preparing for the end of the world, for societal, political, ecological breakdown? How concerned are they by that, and what are they doing about it?
I had a CEO of a Silicon Valley firm say to me, I keep a helicopter gassed up all the time, he said, and he has an air filtration system in the bunker in his basement. Look, it's a bit of an odd preoccupation that has sprung up in Silicon Valley over the last decade. For the book, I went to New Zealand. I visited these bunkers in places like nuclear missile silos under the prairie in Kansas. I think it's very interesting to me that it would happen in, of all places, Silicon Valley, which fancies itself as being the most optimistic place in the world. These are makers of history, makers of the future. So what are they so afraid of? In some ways, they're alert to the fact that their own creations, their own businesses, as one of them said to me, we know that AI is going to put a lot of people out of work, and there may come a point when the public turns against us. And so they have found themselves in a bit of a predicament of their own making, which is that this inequality and the scale of this wealth has grown so fast that society itself hasn't really been able to adapt it. We haven't developed the legal, the cultural, even the psychological evolution to prepare for it. And so it leaves them feeling quite uneasy. It's a bit more of that vertigo we talked about a moment ago.
And yet they seem to have adopted this rhetoric that is kind of like anti-elite, as if somebody else is the elite. Who do they think is the elite? Are we the elite?
It is a bit of a strange thing. I suppose by some definitions, everybody is elite compared to somebody else. I spent some time lingering on this vocabulary. I decided that Americans don't like the noun, the elite, but we very much like the adjective, like elite Navy SEALs. Really, what we mean when we talk about elites in our politics is anybody who looks down on us culturally. That's the thing that, at the center of so much of this, it's about status anxiety. And we know this. I mean, from all the way, back to evolutionary terms, that if you are the chimp at the bottom of the pecking order, you have lower serotonin levels than you do if you're the chimp at the top. And it's, we can dress it up any way we want, but we're perhaps not that much more sophisticated about it. I think people get a tremendous amount of satisfaction and also distress based on where they are on the status ladder.
And look, finally, explain to me this thing about watching sweaty 13-year-olds lose their mind at Flowrider.
That may be the reporting experience I'll never forget, which is I wanted to understand this private economy, of this kind of hidden economy of private gigs. These are pop stars like Beyonce and people like that who will go and play a private closed door gig. And so I embedded, in a sense, in the entourage of the rapper Flo Rida for a bar mitzvah in Chicago. Luckily for me, there were no photos of me dancing, but it I sometimes wondered what it would do. What does it do to the 13-year-olds in the room to grow up with that kind of extraordinary abundance? And what does it say about the economy of our culture, that our biggest stars are now spending more of their time doing that than they were spending an evening in front of a crowd of 30,000?
But what do you think it does do to these kids and indeed to their parents? I mean, because it makes them sound incredibly distant, like almost in a kind of sort of pre-French Revolution way, distant from the public at large. Is that how they feel?
It is a form of seclusion that is more than just a physical seclusion, an experiential seclusion. It becomes a real kind of mental seclusion. And I think you can't understand Elon Musk's misadventure in Washington without seeing it as a demonstration of his seclusion. His he was kind of in a on to borrow the metaphor, I mean, he's kind of on Mars from where most people actually are. When he got up and he said that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and that the greatest fault of Western civilization is empathy, I think a lot of people out there who are, to be perfectly honest, kind of just struggling to buy a house and put their kids through school and pay their healthcare bills just thought, what planet is this guy on? And that's the risk, is that you can build a world that is so incredibly satisfying and luxurious, but as a result you can risk drifting off into a solar system of your own.
Evanosnos, thank you very much indeed. And the haves and have yachts, dispatches from the ultra rich is out now.